Bill Murray was not supposed to be in Caddyshack, not in any meaningful way. His character was a minor role. 3 scenes, maybe 4. The studio barely thought about him. Then he showed up on set, ignored the script, and improvised a monologue that had nothing to do with the movie. That monologue is now one of the most quoted moments in comedy history, and that is the story of Caddyshack, a film where almost everything that worked was an accident. Here is how that happened. A movie without a map. It started with a memory. Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's older brother, had spent years caddying at a golf club in Illinois. He had stories about the class divide between wealthy members and the kids who carried their bags. He brought those stories to Harold Ramis and Doug Kenny. The 3 of them sat down to write a script. What came out was not really a script. It was a collection of characters, situations, scenes that could be funny. There was no clear story from beginning to end. Ramis later described it as a movie without a plot, vignettes built around people who were funny, in a place that was funny, doing things that were funny. That was the plan. And then they hired the cast, and any remaining plan went out the window. The cast that could not be controlled. Comedy titans with no leash. Harold Ramis had never directed a feature film before Caddyshack. He was known as a writer for National Lampoon and Animal House. Respected. But directing was new territory. The cast he was working with was not beginner-friendly. Chevy Chase was coming off his Saturday Night Live fame. Rodney Dangerfield was a stand-up legend with decades of crowd work behind him. Ted Knight was a seasoned television actor. And Bill Murray was in a category of his own. These were not actors who waited for direction. They found the joke themselves and took it somewhere unexpected. Chase barely looked at the script. His character, Ty Webb, was built almost entirely from lines he improvised on the spot. Dangerfield brought his stand-up act directly to set, firing one-liners that had nothing to do with what was written. And Bill Murray showed up late. His scenes were not originally central to the film. Murray's character, Carl Spackler, the groundskeeper, was a minor role. But when Murray arrived days after filming had begun, he delivered a performance so strange and committed that everyone knew they had something. His Cinderella Story monologue, where he narrates an imaginary golf round while destroying flowers, was almost entirely improvised on the day. Nobody told him to do it. He just did it. The problem was that nobody was keeping track of how all these pieces were supposed to fit together. The set that lost control. Production took place in Florida in the summer. The heat was brutal. The schedule kept slipping. The budget kept climbing. The golf course sequences required an animatronic gopher that was supposed to be a recurring sight gag. It kept malfunctioning. Those scenes were expensive, slow to film, and constantly delayed. Every day the gopher did not work was a day the production fell further behind. The atmosphere on set was loose. This was 1979. Parties happened. Nights ran long. Murray and Chase had a well-known tension going back to Saturday Night Live. When they finally filmed their one shared scene together, it reportedly started as a real confrontation before both men pulled back and turned it into something that worked on camera. Nobody planned that. It just happened. That was the nature of the entire production. Ramis directed as fast as he could, making decisions in the moment, holding everything together with instinct and very little else. By the time filming wrapped, they had hundreds of hours of footage. What they did not have was a movie. If this surprises you, subscribe, because most films don't survive this. Rescued in the editing room building a film from the pieces. The first cut of Caddyshack was, by most accounts, incoherent. There were funny scenes, there were strong performances, but there was no through line pulling the audience forward. It played like sketches that happened to share a location. The studio was concerned. Editor David Bretherton, working alongside Ramis, had to make difficult decisions. Characters were reduced, scenes were restructured, the focus shifted, and the gopher, that malfunctioning, over-budget animatronic animal, became the solution. The gopher subplot was expanded in post-production to give the film a recurring thread. Murray's Carl Spackler became the one chasing it. That storyline gave audiences something to track, a loose arc where there had been none. It was not elegant, but it worked. The editors did not save a bad movie. They uncovered a good one buried inside too much footage. The reception and the rise. Critics missed it. Audiences did not. Caddyshack opened in July 1980. The reviews were mixed. Critics noted the lack of plot, and they called it uneven. The film made $39 million against a budget of around $6 million. It was a financial success, but nobody was calling it a landmark. Then cable television happened. HBO and other channels ran Caddyshack on rotation through the early 1980s. Audiences who missed it in theaters watched it at home, then watched it again, and then started quoting it. The lines became part of everyday conversation. Be the ball. So I have that going for me, which is nice. Lines that made little sense outside the film became shorthand for a generation. By the mid-1980s, Caddyshack was not just popular. It was a reference point. The characters included the oblivious aristocrat, the free-spirited slacker, the loud outsider, and the unhinged groundskeeper. They mapped onto social dynamics that gave the film staying power well beyond its jokes. And that staying power built into something no one had predicted, genuine classic status. Why the chaos was the point, the mess was the method. A more controlled production would have produced a more controlled film. A tight script, an experienced director, a schedule that ran on time. That version of Caddyshack would have been fine. Fine is forgettable. What audiences responded to is the feeling that these performers are genuinely surprising each other, that what you are watching was not entirely planned, that behind the camera things were slightly out of control. That energy cannot be manufactured. It comes from conditions exactly like the ones on that Florida golf course in 1979. Ramis said in later interviews that the film's lack of structure was both its biggest problem and its biggest asset. The chaos created space for the performers to find something real, and what they found was something a clean production would never have allowed. Caddyshack is not a film that should have worked. Not on paper, a first-time director, improvisers with no script, a malfunctioning gopher, hundreds of hours of footage assembled into something resembling a story. And yet here it is, 45 years later, still watched, still quoted, still studied by anyone who wants to understand how comedy works. The lesson is not that chaos produces classics. Most chaotic productions produce disasters. The lesson is that when the right performers are given room to find the truth of a moment, and when the editors recognize what they have, something can survive even the messiest of shoots. Caddyshack survived. And then it became something no one on that set could have predicted. It became permanent.